You're listening to Nurture Your Zest. I'm your host, Ashleigh King, and I will introduce you to a wealth of interesting, fascinating individuals from all walks of life who will share their stories, how they've overcome challenges, and you will find out their top tips for success. Through this podcast, you can gain tips to grow and change your life and the way you see the world, and help you to nurture your zest. Hello everyone, today I'm joined by Karl Robson.
Hello, hello, hello.
So Karl, can you tell us about yourself?
I certainly can. I guess there's so much to say, but I describe myself as kind of a social entrepreneur, but also a variety of a person, I guess. My kind of focus now is very much my politics masters and my work for university marketing at Newcastle. But in the past, I did run a record label for 2 years, a social enterprise. It was a lot of fun, it was a lot of excitement. And I was a paid student politician for 2 years as well at Northumbria. So that was a lot of excitement. So there's a lot in there, I guess.
Absolutely. Lots to talk about and lots to chat about. And I'm really excited to have you on the show.
Oh, thank you.
Thank you. And Karl and I met a while ago, but as soon as we met, we just... something sparked. It was like two social butterflies coming together. We're both Leos, so we have the same horoscope sign, I guess, and both have big manes and like to chat. So it was really funny when we used to work together that there would always be people around our tables and the cakes that we would always bring in.
Oh, yes. We always like to have a bit of atmosphere, didn't we, around our desks?
Exactly. If there's no sparkle, you got to bring the sparkle.
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I would love to know more about your journey with having your own recording studio and the fact that was a social enterprise. So often when you think of recording studios, you think of, people who are doing really well, big recording companies, and there are the more indie labels and things like this. But it sounds like a pretty hard thing to set up and run. And how on earth did you even think of doing that?
Oh, gosh. It's quite I hope it's a fun story anyway. I went to a gig to see a band called Mayday Parade. And when I was there with some friends, there were some guys who were handing out CDs in the queue. And I took a CD off them and I thought, wow, it's really cool. It's really interesting. I already kind of had a flair for entrepreneurship at this point. So I kind of saw the value in what they were doing. And after the gig, I was really hyped from just seeing some live music. I thought I'm going to listen to what these guys are giving me and really see what it's like. And it was really good. It was like this amazing content. It was a band called Drop Off Zone, who sadly aren't together anymore. But back then I was like, this is the best thing I've ever listened to. I found them on Facebook and I messaged them and said, I would love to come and chat with you guys about how I can help you. And I became their manager for a short while, actually. And it was about 2 or 3 months later that I kind of realised I really had an interest in this. And it was actually, if I flash back a moment, the day after I saw that gig for Mayday Parade, I woke up and I thought, yeah, I want to run a record label. And I went to people who were my kind of mentors and classmates and colleagues at the time on my entrepreneurial course. And they all very much said, Karl, what makes you think you can run a record label? Like, do you have any experience? And I said, well, no, I have no experience whatsoever, but, I really want to do it. It looks like a lot of fun. I'm going to figure it out. So I met these wonderful people. A gentleman who runs Loft Studios in town, he gave me some guidance. Generator gave me some support. I essentially just Googled how does one start a record label and then just found industry people and I tapped into them and built on that. And then there's a whole other section, but I've rambled for quite a little bit already, Ashleigh. I don't know if you've got any questions on the first bit, maybe.
Well, I'm just astounded, really, just listening, because there's something, not everyone has that zest, that get up and go to just make things happen. So that really is something special. I think that story about just doing that is one thing. Also, when people are saying you shouldn't do this, or how can you do this, or what makes you think you can, I think that's a really inspiring story of courage. And I think also I'm guessing you had to use a lot of creativity to problem solve and make things happen. A big one I could expect or imagine from running my own business is, how on earth did you fund yourself and get started financially?
Yeah, so that was the big thing, I think. I looked, and I'll be honest, I've never been one to have lots of dispensable income, expendable. Yeah, exposable income is a different sort of income. Expendable income to hand. So essentially, I looked to see, what can I do on the cheap to begin with? What is going to cost me next to nothing? Stickers. Very cheap to get stickers. Unfortunately, they didn't stick to anything. So I went through a phase of having like hundreds of stickers I was putting up around town, trying to get the business's name out there through the band drop-off zone. And it was a real challenge because I kept putting them out and they keep getting taken down or washed away. And so I thought, I need to get some capital for this. And that was when I met with a company called Social Enterprise Acumen, who at the time were based in Durham. And I met with them and I said, look, I really need some help. What I'm doing is supporting young people. And it was at this point I kind of decided that the business had to be about helping people and had to be about supporting young artists and getting them to kind of learn about what a business is and how it works. And after chatting with Kate Welsh, who was the chief exec and I think still is of Social Enterprise Acumen, she said, it sounds to me, Karl, like you want to start a community interest company. And very fortunately, she went through a process with me where I was able to apply for some European funding. And Lord behold, I was successful. And I used that money to really kickstart things. It can be quite a hard process to incorporate and to do the forms for a kick. I got rejected or kicked back about 6-7 times. And it was all on paper. It was the worst. I remember I wrote out these really lengthy documents and they rejected it based on my handwriting, rejected it based on a spelling error in one place, and it cost me like £50 in just postage because I was sending it recorded. It was such a nightmare. And once I got it incorporated and got that funding, it kind of got moving, and I started thinking, maybe I can make some money off of this. And I started sending the band off to do gigs in town, and they were making a bit of money, and I got very excited very fast. And that was when we started to grow. So yeah, I guess the next part would be kind of the growth of the business. But once again, I've said so much, I feel like I should breathe.
Well, it's really interesting you say that, because I was just thinking I would love to know more about this rejection that you will have faced at that time. So hearing news in a letter or on a computer screen, we've actually had this conversation before, but it's that whole mindset of computer says no. You want to do something cool, you want to do something creative that really inspires people and connects people, and then there's this blocker that says computer says no, and it's so frustrating sometimes. And I'm just wondering how you coped with that rejection and how you found the passion and the motivation to move through that and put that next application in.
I'll be honest, it was really, at the time, I found it annoying. And it was a little bit disheartening, I must admit, because some of the rejections were quite petty. Or at least what I would receive as petty. I think the government would define it as important part of regulatory paperwork. I dealt with it by spending some time reflecting and editing things as they should be. I met with Melissa Middleton from Project Northeast, actually, and she gave me some tips on how to craft it as well, and she was fabulous. And I tried to get some help from Kate Welsh over at Social Acumen. But when I finally did get it approved about 5 or 6 times or whatever it was amazing to finally get that form back that said, okay, you've got a community interest company now. And Override Records was born that day, and it really felt like that was our big moment of actually, okay, this is real. This is a thing now, and we have to get insurance. Was my next step, really. So yeah, that was that's how I dealt with the rejection. Really, I just kind of took it in my stride. There was too much going on to worry about the paperwork.
Wow. I'm just so inspired because I love music and how it brings people together, and just the idea of starting a record company and not knowing how to do that is just great. So growing and scaling, how did you cope with that?
I made some wonderful. I learned a lot from this stage. I got very excited very fast. I decided if I can make one band work, clearly I can make 4 work. And so I went recruiting. I got some very swanky business cards made that were very expensive, as one does when they're excited about starting a new business. And I went out recruiting and I looked for the best upstarts in the city. I had some amazing young people, some of them with some challenges that we had to work together on. And we got them to do some amazing recordings. And it sounded great. What it felt like at the time was, oh my God, this is working. And I started getting them gigs in the city and I sent them over to Gateshead for gigs. And it was all kind of coming together. And that was the real peak of when it was working, when we were about 5 people strong in total. And I had this wonderful friend of mine called Jenny who was acting as our musical director, because what I figured out very fast was when we were doing these kind of trials, is that I thought everyone sounded great. And I had no clear idea of what a talented musician's defined by. And she was a trained vocal coach, and she gave me the real indication of, is somebody good or are they great? Do they have potential? Do they need training? And we did this amazing recruitment, and it was all going well at that stage. And we were doing stuff all around town. And that was the good part. So I'll leave that part as a kind of segment.
Well, before we move on to the part where it got hard and a bit tricky, I want to know, what is it like to manage musicians? I mean, from what you see of films and what you maybe read in Enemy or all these different magazines, is that there are lots of egos. Did you experience that?
I won't name names, but there was one. I will mention a couple of occasions actually that I tell these stories from time to time. I was in the recording studio for one of the bands, and I remember sitting there, and everyone had turned up either on time or early, apart from the lead singer. And I remember sitting there and thinking, any minute now he's going to come. He knows we spent about $1,000 on this recording day. He's not going to miss out on this day. And I got a phone call, and he said, I'm on my way back from Glastonbury. I'm covered in mud, but don't worry, I'll be there soon. And we waited 2 hours. And I'm not being even kidding. It was a very expensive day. Every hour was like £100 or more. It was really painstaking. And when he finally got here, he was covered in mud. He was still partially drunk. And it was just a challenge. It was a really challenging day. The bandmates were frustrated. They were singing and their voice was cracking, and there's only so much editing you can do. And I remember sitting there and thinking, I've got to find a way to fix this, and fast. And it was difficult. That was probably the most difficult emotionally of the stages of that part of the growth, was me sitting there thinking, I may just lose £1,000 right now. I may come out of this and not have a product. And I was told by multiple people who were mentoring me to let that person go, and to just cancel the contract, say, you've let me down, this is over. But I couldn't. They were a good guy. They were a really good person and had a good heart. They were just young, a bit naive, had made a mistake and probably didn't realise the situation they were in. So, yeah, that was, probably the hardest moment. I've got a more fun story, though, if you'd like to hear that one.
I would love to hear that. But also, yeah, I really sympathise with you when you're spending a fortune on recording time, and then, it's a lot of money to then, get left stung with a bill like that when you're trying to get the project off the ground, break even and monetize things. I feel like that sometimes if guests let me down, and it's really important to, I guess, for anyone working with studio time or to actually show up. So that must have been really tough, but let's hear the funny one.
Oh gosh. So we had an invite from a good pal of ours at the time to support at the O2 Academy. And so we had the opportunity to really do a good long set at the O2 Academy. A few of the artists did. And it was supporting a gentleman called Nick Salino at the time. And it was a lot of fun. Anyway, I've been chatting with the venue managers and organising, coordinating to make sure everything goes off without a hitch. And it comes to the end of one of the band's sets. And the lead singer turns to the audience and he says, well, I've always wanted to try this, so we're going to try something new. And I was stood there, I was like, oh no, what is he possibly going to do? And he says, right, I want this half of the room to go to the left and the other half of the room to go to the right side of the room. And then when the bass drops, I want you to run at each other as fast as you can and like just run into each other. And what I now know as a wall of death is what they call it. I have never ran so fast in my life to the middle of the room to try and, do you know in Jurassic Park when he puts his hands out and he's trying to stop the dinosaurs from that essentially was me. And there was one security guard looking at me like, what on earth are we going to do? And then the bass dropped and all these young people, 17, 18-year-olds, ran at each other. And I was just pulling them apart and people were getting trampled. And oh my gosh, it was the most awkward conversation with a venue manager I've ever had. But all he said was, well, no one got hurt. Don't let it happen again. And I was like, that is the luckiest escape I have ever had.
So how would that be different from a mosh pit?
Well, I'll be honest, I don't have an in-depth knowledge of mosh pit versus wall of death. All I know is that they're different insurances. I've looked this up, and there's specific insurances for those sort of activities at events, which I clearly didn't have. But they're dangerous. They're dangerous things. And, you know, if you want to do them, you have to be very clear to people beforehand that this could be something that's going to happen. And, you know, then give them another warning. So I guess on one hand, he did warn them in a sense of, this is going to happen in 5 minutes, get prepared for it. But it was a dangerous, exciting part of that evening, shall we say.
And I think this is one of the things I was thinking about ego and managing bands, and how there's all the reputational stuff that comes with bands and music and drugs and all this kind of stuff. Even thinking about Woodstock. So they tried to do a repeat Woodstock. I think it was in the 90s. But Limp Bizkit were one of the bands. And I remember reading of they had some serious mosh pits and very big injuries at this particular event. And I guess it can get out of hand pretty quick.
Absolutely. It is scary, I guess. As someone who was stood there with my newly formed kick, talking in my business description about helping young people, what I didn't want was a few months later to have to explain why young people were trampled in a concert hall. It really wouldn't have gone down well. And as the person responsible for the business, I felt quite in danger at that point of you know, losing something that I just started to build. So it was quite scary. And I think, you know, running events, it was probably the most challenging part of the label, really, was managing those egos, as you say. And there's things that I can't quite talk about, you know, some of the artists. They had varied activities outside of being, you know, full-time musicians. So it certainly was a lot to manage.
Absolutely. Something I'm interested in, and it's something we've spoken about on Nurture Your Zest before, is this idea of where everyone thinks you're doing really well on the outside from your social media or just the way you're presenting yourself or how much business you're getting. But on the inside, you can really be struggling. And even down to things like we had one former guest talk about, you know, everyone thinking he was doing great, but he couldn't afford a sandwich at one time. And I wonder, did you ever have a time like that where people thought everything was going super great, but inside you were thinking, wow, I need some help?
Yeah. That essentially was when I grew the business and everything kind of started to go a little bit wrong. And that was where I kind of had the point where people were saying to me, oh, you know, everything looks like it's going great. They had me guest speaking at schools. I was guest speaking at Newcastle College in Northumbria and even at Newcastle Uni once. And it was all like talking about how amazing things were. But in the back of my head, I knew I had to go back and find money. I guess I could talk about the growth if you want, a bit about how that fabulous. Yeah, when I had the 5 artists, I was quite excited. I thought, you know what, I'll just keep growing. I was 6 months into running a business. I'd already, you know, expanded by 5 times at this point. I was like, I can just keep going until it makes lots of money. And I just kind of thought, well, how am I going to do that? I can't afford to do that right now. I'm breaking even. So I went to the Social Enterprise Festival in the Sage, and I did a presentation along with a few others. And I was very fortunate that I won some money. And I took that money and I bought lots of equipment. And that equipment allowed us to generate quite a lot of income very fast. And I got carried away. I did what a lot of people do, I guess, when they have a bit of fortune and luck early on, which is think this is going to continue, it's going to get better. And I went out to recruitment again. And I expanded, and we ended up with 14 people who were signed to the record label. And I remember sitting there thinking, I've got an empire now. I've got, something to really, if I can get every one of these people in sessions 3 times a week, I'm making thousands. It'll be amazing. And then I realized that I was at capacity and that actually the city had need music. It had people who were providing the business I was offering. And they just didn't need most of my artists. I was filling a gap, which I now had too many people to fill. So suddenly I had a lot of artists who weren't getting the opportunity to record or weren't getting the opportunity to perform and make money. And suddenly I was, doing them a disservice, but I wasn't generating any money either. And it was at that point where the profits all started to dip. We had Brexit, which meant any future European funding attached to the first bit of money I won disappeared completely. And that was really tragic because the next step up, we were looking at like 2 and then 5 grand and more. And it was like a process that just completely disappeared from beneath me. And that was scary. That was when I had to start working in a bar 4 or 5 nights a week. I had uni full time. I was working I was working for Sarah Crimmins at the same time, and she was amazing. And she let me do social media during the day. So I was doing work for her during the day. I was going to uni, I was working, and I was still skinned. And I was still having to go to Tesco and, buy the Whoops sandwiches at like 1 pence at midnight and buy potatoes in bulk and eat them. And that was tough. It was really tough.
Yeah, and wow, that idea of growing so fast and then everything tumbling is a big story that you hear in entrepreneurship, and it comes up time and time again. And I'm listening to you here and I'm wondering, how many people did you have around you as a team?
In the business, it was myself and Jenny. As things were going wrong, I tried to bring one of the artists who was a bit older, a bit wiser, on board and tried to get them to help me manage. It didn't really pan out. To no fault of them, it was just not the right fit. And then I started asking for help a little bit from some of the mentors. But the real challenge is that I didn't know what was entirely going wrong at the time. I just knew that if I could find business, it would be fixed. And I just kept telling myself that next week I was going to find lots of new opportunities for these artists. I was going to fix it all. And I had them, texting me, ringing me, messaging me saying, when's the next thing coming along? And there was that real expectation that I was going to figure out a way. And I was putting in bids for money for pots that were vaguely stuff that I could apply to the business, real vague stuff towards the end. And I just didn't win any of the money. And I was so convinced because I'd won twice in a row that, maybe I'm just great at selling things. And I think, it wasn't the case. I just think I got it right those 2 times. And that was tough. Yeah. And people started to get frustrated that they weren't getting what they wanted from the business. And I then started kind of looking insular, like a bit. I became introverted, I guess, a little bit, and kind of just thought I need to just generate money to keep things floating. And if I'm really honest, that was when I was getting migraines all the time and I was having nosebleeds, and it was really tough. And I waited 8 weeks before I rang the 111 number and said, like, I've had a migraine for the last 8 weeks. Do you think I should go and get it checked out? And looking back, of course I should have. If somebody else said that to me, I would have said yes. And they made me go straight to A&E, and I had all these scans done. My parents at that point got involved, and they just said it was all stress. They said, it's really hard to pinpoint stress normally, but he said right now you just need to take a break from it all. And yeah, that was kind of when I decided maybe I can't do this anymore. And I just started turning things off one at a time.
Wow. And how did that feel to fail, to actually say, you know what, I've tried to carry this, I've tried to be strong, but my body's letting me down. You know, it's shutting down for me. I'm not able to deliver on this. How did that feel for you personally?
I think I admitted to myself that it wasn't working. And I admitted to some close friends, but I guess in a sad way, I never quite brought myself to admit to all the artists in like I never announced it on the Facebook page. I never made a post. I never really said, I failed and I'm really sorry, but this is over. I actually, I contacted them and said, you know, to let you know, you're released from all your contracts. I'm not going to hold you to any of these contracts. These contracts are 2 years long. The business isn't right now okay, is the way I described it. I was still very much on the lens of, it might get better again. But I said, you know, you're released from your contract. Please go and do whatever you want. And that was it. And I still to this day haven't admitted on Facebook really. It's just funny enough, without being too emotional, this is probably the first time I've really publicly admitted that it failed. Yeah, it didn't work.
So, and this will, you know, this is something that's going out there. It's going out into the ether, to the podcast world, to the various different channels it goes out to. But I guess one thing that really stands out for me, and I think is really powerful, is the fact that you were a student this whole time you were doing that. So an undergrad student, a young person who had a lot of, sure, some of it was luck, but a lot of success very quickly. And, you know, do you ever sit and think, wow, actually, I really achieved a lot?
I do sometimes, but I sacrificed a lot. I got a third-class degree in the end of my undergraduate, and I scraped that through. And it was through sheer willpower that my lecturers put faith in me, and I think they saw that I was more entrepreneurial than academic, and they gave me a lot of time. I was the sort of student who wouldn't turn up to a lecture, but would be networking over in another place, so I'd be shadowing someone from somewhere, and I was never idle, but I was never in lectures either. So I think the problem is that I'm proud of what I gave a go at doing, but actually it came at a massive cost, and it nearly cost me my education really, and I was very lucky that I was able to become a student officer on the back of the students of Northumbria having faith in me, and to get into Newcastle on the back of being a good networker, really. You know, hopefully the university don't hear this and go, oh, we shouldn't have done that. But, you know, being a confident, talkative person, I was able to find my way into Newcastle University more than academically earn it, really.
I think it's probably a mixture of your warmth and your personal statement and your ability to give a lot, which you did do at Northumbria University for 2 years as a student officer. And so I think you underestimate your contributions. I know that they were a lot. And actually on that note, you know, it's really powerful to hear your story. And I think for a lot of people, startups don't always go well. A lot of what you said there is scary for me, because you're saying things and I'm thinking, oh my word, this is so true for me right now. You know, I've got a lot of things going on and I'm trying to tie things down to go a bit slower, but when things grow, they grow, and that can be challenging. So yeah, I'm really grateful for your stories, but I'm also a bit scared. And so I would also like to ask you, because I think it's brave anyway to be an entrepreneur while a student, to do all the other stuff that you were involved in, but you were also in student politics. So you had a really busy time, but how was that to be, you know, someone young and engaged in politics? Because this is something that comes up all the time, that young people don't want to engage.
I completely fell into politics. I was a student who had a big mouth and a lot of opinion. And at Northumbria, I was very harsh of my predecessor in my role. And if she is listening, my apologies. But I had a lot to say. And, I stood up there during the election period and I said, I disagree with what my predecessor has done in the role. I think I can do it better. And then it just so happened that year, the students of Northumbria liked what I had to say and they believed in me. And I got the couple thousand votes. I got I think it was 1,000 majority or something. And I got elected into the position of Vice President Education. And I was very proud. And I was probably the only person to be in that position with a third class degree. And I got to go to meetings with the Vice Chancellor and the Deputy Vice Chancellor on a regular basis and say to them, look, this is my perspective as somebody who didn't perform particularly well at this university about how we can do more and do better. And then I got involved in the national student political movement from that, which is a bit more hazy because I was very, very opinionated at the National Union of Students. And I led 2 campaigns at Northumbria to try and make us leave the National Union of Students, which, just to clarify, is nothing like Brexit, nothing at all like Brexit. And if anyone isn't sure of what the National Union is, give it a Google. My name comes up pretty high up there.
I'm going to have to look at that. I'm really excited, actually, to look into that. Yeah, I know that there's been a lot of, it can be very complicated because each university has their own student union and then they've got, a national body that they have to obey. But it's really complicated when you've got all these different stakeholders, plus you've got all of your own students and your student union, the rules of all the staff that you're trying to lead, but also, being in such an important role at such a young age, because you're a trustee of your union, right?
Yeah, I'm a director as well, yeah.
Yeah, so again, a very big responsibility for a young age. So really, you've had quite a lot of unique experiences, and and you've said as well that in many cases you've fallen into these positions. So there must be something about you that attracts people to you, or your warmth or ability to make opportunities happen. Have you ever thought about that, or thought how these things come to you?
I think I put it down to shy bairns get nowt. I think at the end of the day, every opportunity I've been given has been because I've been bold enough to ask. When I first got help off of Project Northeast, which is the first company that gave me support, I just asked. I emailed and said, I'm really interested in learning more about business, teach me. And they did. When I got onto my entrepreneur's degree, I emailed a gentleman called Graham Beatty and I said, I want to come to Northumbria, I want to do an entrepreneurial degree, help me. And he did. And it was, being very cheeky that I managed to get opportunities like working with the wonderful Caroline Fearbold or Charlotte Windybank, who, networkers will know from the community. They gave me so much time. The likes of Sarah Crimmins, who gave me some work opportunity in her time. That is what molded me to be able to be cheekier, I think, to have confidence. Those people built my confidence up and gave me the kind of, I'm not afraid to walk into a room and just chat to anyone vibe. So I owe a lot to them, really, the people who gave me the push in the right direction.
Absolutely. And that's really special. And that idea of going and networking and meeting people and sometimes helping them out, but sometimes asking for help as well. I'd like to know, has there ever been a time when you haven't felt included?
I think during low points, for my mental health in particular, which, I'll be honest, I don't talk a great deal about, but I don't think that's from, trying to be insulated. Perhaps I just don't get asked the question a lot. In particular, when the business was starting to go downhill, I kind of cut myself off and I just worked and I slept and I worked and I slept. And that was everything to me. I didn't have relationships. I had one friend at the time still left, really. And that was my way of dealing with it, of condensing it all. And then when I was a student officer in my final year, so only about a year and a bit ago, I was having a really hard time with work, because I don't know how much listeners know about being a student officer, but it never really switches off. You become a little bit, and I don't mean this in a braggy way, but of a celebrity on campus, which means students would ring me at like 3 o'clock in the morning with deadlines that they're worried about, or, students would drop me emails that require a response within 5 minutes, or they'd require me to go and tell a lecturer off because they'd broken a rule of some sort, and I'd have to sit in disciplinaries, and all of that takes a toll. And I felt like at the time I couldn't include myself in too much of other people's lives outside of work, because actually I was in quite a negative place. I think you absorb the energy of where you are, and if you spend enough time fighting battles, you leave the space and you're like, actually, I'm not in a place now to share my energy and who I feel like.
And sometimes you need to put those boundaries in place, and it can be really hard. And I'm curious, how did you nurture your zest? How did you get back to yourself, to Karl? How did you find it?
I think each time that these difficult things or challenging things have happened, I have changed a little bit. So I don't think I've come out of the other end of being stressed and ever being the same person. I think I've always kind of adapted a little bit and learned a little bit about who I am a bit more. And I've tested myself, and it comes to the end of it and I think, actually, okay, this is my limit. This is my new limit even sometimes. And I know now when to kind of stop spinning plates a little bit. So I try to give myself evenings again now, whereas my evenings in a past life were always going back and replying to messages. Any poor soul who has me on Facebook will know that I very rarely respond to Facebook messages in good time. And it's just because I spent so long being constantly attached to them that my way now of dealing with it is to just look at it twice a day, really, in the morning and before bed, unless I'm going on for a reason. So the way I nurtured my zest was to look forward at kind of what exciting part of the future can be, to take what I'd learned from the hard times and to build a new version of myself on that. It might not sound super, super healthy, but I'm really proud of who I am. And that's, battle scars included, really.
I think the battle scars are the most beautiful. It's what makes us all unique and special. And I think as well, Sarah Crimmins said this in her podcast on the show, but it's what helps you to see something special in other people, and it brings people together. So I think there's really something special about those scars. And I know now as well that all of those people who will be listening, who are thinking about starting a business or wondering what it's really like, or maybe are running a business where it's not going well, and they're thinking, you know what, I'm too scared to let anybody down. People have given me money. I've won funding. I'm a failure. To actually know that it's okay and it gets better. So I know that this will be a really inspiring story, because already for me, it's a warning to remind myself that I am not a superwoman, and actually we all have limits, and boundaries are important, but also, that actually asking for help's okay. So thank you for inspiring me and listeners also.
You're so kind, and I would describe you as a superwoman, Ashleigh. I really would.
Oh, thank you. I do like to. I like variety. That's a big fun for me. I would hate a job where you were doing the same thing day in, day out. Data entry or processing something for me would be the worst.
Absolutely. Got to keep it exciting, right? I'd rather be busy than bored any day.
Exactly. And also, if it's not exciting enough, you can always make it exciting. Add a sprinkle of drama.
Absolutely.
So before we go, I have to ask, what is your number one word to nurture your zest?
Oh, I love the word fabulous. I often say the word fabulous. So I've got to say, if it hasn't already been taken, fabulous.
I love that, and it hasn't been taken. It's very similar to Gareth, Longstaff from Newcastle University said exquisite, which is another beautiful word. So let's go with fabulous. I'm very happy with that. And would you like to tell us why you chose that word?
Yeah, I once did an award ceremony for the Northumbria University, and I stood on stage and I didn't realise that I use the word fabulous so often. And the university staff started playing a fun, jesty drinking game for every time I said fabulous. And it turned out that I said it about 20, 30 times in one night. And I remember afterwards going and chatting to them, and it was such fun energy about it that ever since then, when I used to walk past people on campus, students, staff alike would be like fabulous as I would walk past them. And actually it's a great word. It has lots of positive energy about it. I love it.
I love it, and I love that you've shared that story. So thank you so much, and I hope you all enjoyed listening to this fabulous episode. And thanks very much, Karl.
No, thank you very much.
You've been listening to Nurture Your Zest. You can find us online on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Nurture Your Zest. If you've liked today, please subscribe. You can also leave us a review if you're feeling extra kind. Today's podcast has been made available through the kind sponsorship of TL Multimedia and That Branding Company. We look forward to catching up with you again soon as you learn to nurture your zest.